here at Phoenix National Business Group Studios here in New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Yes, so it's great to be back. It is great to be back on the line. Of course, right now is our last program for Relationship Empowerment Month. And we have had some great programs this week where we have some of our guests that came back. We're going to just review and talk about some of the things that we have been talking about all week long. But we have a special guest today. Her name is Ramona Thomas, and she's going to really talk to us about how to be financially together with our finances, especially in a relationship. How to just kind of work your finances together. And of course, y'all are familiar with her when we were doing our Financial Empowerment Month last month. And she spoke about personal finances and investments, things like that. So it is great to have her back on the network programming. Also, those of you who are watching, if you haven't registered yet, you need to go to Phoenix National Business Group .com and register for the $100 appreciation gift from Phoenix National Business Group just for watching the program. So don't miss out on that. You want to do it right now before the program ends at the end of the month. So also please register, go on the website, and we'll pick some 5 people to give this gift to. Also, if you retain the services of anyone that's within our network, that is Ramona Thomas, Joel Jaro, Frank Coppola, Oscar Capel, myself, anyone that's within the network or on the program, you'll receive a gift of $50 for retaining the services. And that is only good for 5 people as well. So we're looking forward to sending this out to you, but you have to register. We have to know that you're there, and we have to know that you are watching. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Ramona Thomas, and she's going to talk about what we can do as far as couples and individuals with our finances. Ramona, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's always good to have you.
Wonderful. So, thanks for having me back. And we're talking about relationships and sort of managing our money. So, Phil asked me to come back and talk about, Ramona, we're having relationship programming. What are some things that couples, people who are getting married or partnering up, what should they be talking about or thinking about as they merge their finances together? So I do have one slide. Can I share my
Yes,
screen
yes, you
or?
can. Yes, you can.
Oh, let's see how I can do that quickly. Let me know when you can see it, and I'll just talk through.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Yep, can. Yes, we
Great.
can.
So these are kind of the 7 topics, and I'll just briefly talk about each one. So as you think about getting married or partnering or coupling up with your partner or spouse, a couple of things that you should really talk about and have conversations about budgeting. And I did a whole session on personal finance and the importance of budgeting and cash flow. But sit down and do a budget together and be really clear about who's going to pay what, who's going to be responsible for what. If you're splitting things 50-50, if someone's going to do the heavy lifting on the rent, the mortgage, and the other partner is going to do, the groceries, like just be really clear about that. Have a conversation about it and who's going to manage the finances. So if you're merging bank accounts or if you decide to keep separate accounts, but maybe you'll have one joint account that you put a portion of your income in, right? So maybe you're going to put 90% of your income in or all of your income in, and you're going to do everything together. These are the kinds of conversations you should have, because I think sometimes people assume it's going to be one way and it isn't. And that's where, money problems kind of come up in the relationship pretty early. So talk about what's comfortable, what you'd like to have. If it's 100%, you're going to do everything together, great. If it's not, talk about that. The second thing you want to talk about is debt. For people who are still managing student loans, I work with people at various age groups who are still managing student loans or credit card debt. You guys definitely want to talk about that, especially if you're going to get married and, legally you're going to be responsible for the other's debt. You definitely want to talk about, outstanding liabilities that you have, old loans that still may be outstanding that you're trying to pay down, especially if you think you might want to buy a home together because both your credit will be run. So you want to talk about how you're going to manage the debt, pay down the debt, and if you're going to take out debt together, a mortgage, a car note, anything like that, home improvements. You just want to make sure that you guys are clear that you can afford any new debt while you have a plan for paying off any existing or old debt, and that you're clear about how you're going to pay it off. So have a plan for that. And if you are blending families, this is also really important. So if your partner, spouse has children and he or she is paying child support, you just want to really be on top of that because once you marry, if let's just say you get married and your spouse has outstanding child support, legally as a spouse, you will be responsible for that. So you just want to be clear as you're merging your finances legally what you will and will not be responsible for. Education expenses. So if either of you are going to go back to grad school or as you have children, thinking about how to cover expenses for your children. Maybe there's, private school, parochial school tuition, certainly college, how you start thinking about that, how you start saving for that, and having some expectations for how you plan for your children's education. The fourth topic is around long-term goals. So long-term, as you think about, your marriage, your partnership, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, what does it look like financially? Will one of you or both of you start a business? How will you fund that? Will one or both of you do something different in terms of volunteer work, charity work? Financially, where do you guys want to be? Some couples just have milestones. We want to be at this amount in savings. We want to have $250,000. We want to have $1 million. We want to have X amount of dollars. Together, what are you guys working towards? And what does that mean? In terms of home purchase, when you buy a home, is it just the home you want to raise your children in? And then you might want to do a smaller retirement home. Do you want to move to Florida and be snowbirds? Like really think about long term. What does your life together look like? And how do you fund it financially? How do you start working towards those goals when you become empty nesters, the kids are off to college, or as you get to your golden years? What does that look like? Part of that goes into my fifth topic that you should be talking about, which is retirement. And I know this is really hard for people who are in their 30s and 40s to talk about because you think I still have 25, 30 years to go. Let me tell you, the years go fast. So it's a great conversation to have while you're young, and just know that a lot of the topics that I'm mentioning, they will evolve over time. It's not like you have the conversation now as you're getting married or moving in together and it's going to be fixed. As you evolve in your relationship, as your family evolves, as it grows, your goals, your financial goals are going to evolve with you. So, you may not have an idea of what retirement looks like at 35 or 40, but as you get closer to it, you will. But you still want to think about early on that you want to retire. That maybe is the first question. I know some people are like, nope, I want to work the rest of my life. And I know other people, clients who want to retire in their 50s. So just kind of think about what that might look like for both of you. And again, do you stay in the home that you're in? Do you stay in the region that you're in? Or do you move somewhere warmer, somewhere colder? Do you think about leaving the city and going somewhere more rural, or stay in the city and, get rid of your car and kind of walk to everything? So start thinking about, what retirement looks like, write it down. And I would just urge you to continue to talk about it every so often, and making sure that you are allocating resources towards retirement so that you don't get to 65 or 63 and you realize we did all these other things, but we didn't save a nest egg for retiring. So like I said, the years go fast. Just have that conversation of what it looks like. The next thing is around life insurance. And, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Even if we aren't in a pandemic, life insurance is something that's really important. It's a way to protect your assets. It's just something that you should talk about and making sure that you have enough, especially if you have children. There are some people who don't have life insurance who don't believe they need it because they have enough assets to take care of their children if something happens to them or their estate. But for those that don't, it's definitely something to talk about. So I'll give you a scenario, you know, uh, married couple, two children, heaven forbid something happens to the spouse, one of the spouses, you want your children to be able to stay in their home. And so you want to make sure that you have enough protection to pay off the mortgage. Grief is hard enough, to miss someone that you love and trying to figure out how you're going to live life without them. But then to have a whole bunch of financial difficulties, how do we think about the mortgage? How do we think about the children's education? You just want to make sure that you're talking about having the right protection for your assets, to be able to cover your income, heaven forbid something happens, and to be able to leave something for your children if you don't have assets in another place. And that leads me to my last topic. It's not the last, but just sort of rounding out the seven of the things that couples should talk about as they're merging their lives together is around estate planning. And I think sort of the misconception around estate planning is that you have to be wealthy to have an estate. And an estate is anything that you plan to leave to someone else. So if you own a home, if you have a bank account, if you have a 401k, if you have a savings account, if you have a car, these are things that you want to plan for the transfer of assets to the people that you love. And if you don't plan for that transfer of assets, the state will. So while I am certainly not an estate planning attorney, I can promise you that if you don't have plans for your estate, and we can look at very famous examples, of celebrities who passed away and didn't have a will. And the state was making decisions about how to distribute their assets. So when you think about estate planning, you want to think about whether or not you need a will and what's in your will. Should you have a trust? And a trust will distribute your assets according to how you want them distributed. Thinking about a healthcare um, directive. Again, we are in the middle of a pandemic. Something happens to you, who's going to make decisions for you? And I think, oftentimes people think, well, my spouse will do it. But sometimes, I was just talking to an estate planning attorney, and he has a client who said, I don't want my spouse to do it because if something happens to me, she's going to be so overcome with grief and despair. I'm not sure that she'll know what to do if I'm unable to make healthcare decisions for myself. So you might want to think about, is your spouse in a situation, an emergency situation, will he or she be able to make the decisions? Will they know what you want? So these are the kinds of things you should talk about. Do you want to be resuscitated? Do you want to be on a ventilator? Do you want a blood transfusion? It's a hard conversation, but the more you have that conversation with your partner, you write it down. It just makes it so much easier for your family members to carry out your wishes. The other thing too, in the case of families that have small children, who's going to raise your children if something happens to you and or your spouse? And is that person or are those people aware of how you want your children raised? And then the other thing is a power of attorney is part of the estate planning. Should you be in a position where you're temporarily unable to make legal decisions, financial decisions for yourself, who should make those decisions? So there's a lot within each of those topics. But these are the kinds of conversations that partners and couples should have, even if you've been married. There are people who've been married for years and they haven't had these conversations around healthcare planning or healthcare directive or retirement or their, long-term goals. So it's always a great time to have these conversations with the people that you love, your family members and loved ones. So I will end there. That's kind of my highlights for couples.
Oh wow, that was phenomenal. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Ramona. That
My
was
pleasure.
awesome. You mentioned so many things, and I think they were all essential. I just want to welcome back Joel Jaro, who is on our summit with us as well. Welcome back, Joel.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate it.
Anytime, anytime, anytime.
That was
So
great.
we're just gonna summarize some of the things that we've been talking about. We have Oscar here as well with us, and Joel, just reintroduce yourself to those of us who are watching.
Sure. My name is Joel Jaro. I'm a licensed psychotherapist. Been doing this work for many years. If people saw the previous broadcast, maybe many haven't. I've worked in two different countries, two different languages. I lived in Israel for about 5 years, did a lot of post-traumatic stress work there and recovery work, and I predominantly worked here. And I do a lot of work with couples. That's one of my primary specialty areas. But I work with a wide array of people. But I think, some of these principles sort of cross over into many arenas. So I work with a lot of young adults, emerging adults that are, as we call, fairy to launch. They're having some difficulties adapting to life away from home and end up coming back home. This is becoming, I think, a particular phenomenon right now during COVID. I work a lot with, sort of the most fundamental areas in terms of depression, anxiety that people come in with. And I also do psychological clearances. I work with a surgeon. I'm going to give him another shout out again because he's phenomenal. It's Dr. Jonathan Arad. He's based in Ardsley, New York. And I do psychological clearances, which is a prerequisite before having a weight loss surgery. You need to be psychologically cleared as well as cleared medically in other ways. So those are my prime areas of focus. I've pretty much a young adult to adult population. And as I said, one of my main specialty areas are couples. But as I've mentioned in the previous episodes, that if people don't come in with the issue of a relationship problem, they usually swing around to it at some point. And it's pretty much universal that at some point it's going to come up.
How heavily, I mean, we just heard Ramona talk about the financial aspect of putting things together. How heavy does finances weigh on sessions that you've had?
It weighs heavily for couples in distress. It's always an issue, but obviously couples are coming to me when they're in distress. So obviously it's going to weigh heavily in my room. Even if the room is a Zoom room, predominantly these days, it's usually in a physical office. Still is from time to time. But it's basically money and sexual intimacy, quite frankly, that are the main areas. You could switch them off 1 and 2, which are the areas that, for me, become red flags. When those once weren't issues, especially when things were going well at a certain point in both of those arenas, usually people can work around the peripheral issues somewhat as long as they have a real soul connection, in my view. But when things start dissipating in those arenas, that's when I know there's a problem. And that's when I sort of dig in with people around that. They may not even be aware of it. That's a manifestation of a larger issue, which is that they're having a hard time managing their lives together. And, when you're stressed and you're feeling distant, you're obviously going to remove yourself intimately and not have desire to engage intimately. And one can also act very thoughtlessly around money when you're not thinking in terms of partnership. So there's things like people racking up expenses online, which is happening a lot now because so many people are home. So the Amazon Prime bill is through the roof, and there's no consultation with the other partner. And then the other partner hits the roof when they see you bought like a, I don't know, $600 Bose sound bar, and you didn't consult with your partner around it. We usually set parameters about kind of things you need to consult with. Something in the $100 to $200 range. You need to talk to your partner about it. However you sort of handle your finances, just out of respect. because inevitably your money's being pulled on some level. So to me, that's just a manifestation of removing yourself.
Mhm.
And intimately, financially, and other ways, and then it becomes sort of a focus of our work, of what's underneath these issues that are leading you to become more thoughtless or just self-centered financially and more removed intimately, and then we really can begin to do the work.
So it's like, does the financial affect the sexual area of the relationship as well?
Yes, for sure. It can start off with an issue like that. That's
Mhm.
a good question. It's not as if it's just a manifestation of larger problems. If you just come about having financial problems, and especially at a time like this during COVID,
Right.
for most people to no fault of their own, that in and of itself is going to create some tension. As we talked in the last segment, it can be a little bit of the blame game that goes on, and not always a lot of understanding, sometimes based on understanding your partner, sometimes knowing that they may not be the most assertive when it comes to their responsibilities. And so they have that issue anyway. Now COVID comes around where there's a real issue. They may be downsized, lose their job, or et cetera. And then a lot of those frustrations come up around it. Or it just purely may be that things are going well. I respect how you handle your finances, the way Ramona described. You sort of have a linear way of thinking and a logical way of thinking, but the money's not coming in. And
Mhm.
inevitably going to lead to tension. And if you're tense about it, if you're tense about paying the rent, if you're tense about paying the mortgage, if you're tense about how are you going to feed your children, you're unfortunately going to lash out at your partner, feel distant from them, and then removed in the bedroom. And then it becomes this really negative, cyclical problem.
So it just grows. The problem it may start out small, but because it's not been dealt with, kind of expands into other
It sort of
areas.
mushrooms out of control. And that's generally when one of the partners will pick up the phone and say, we need some help.
Wow. I know right now we have your email on the board, but what is the ways that they can reach out to you?
Directly, they can contact me, 917-843-4399.
Mm-hmm.
Website is jarotherapyny.com. Those are the primary modes that people can speak to me on, contact me. And once again, even on this somewhat brief presentation, if people have any questions around this or anything that got triggered by this, feel free to give me a call. I provide, complimentary consultations for folks if they just had any questions that may have gotten sparked by what we just talked about now. I'd just be more than happy to answer them, or if they're interested in getting help because they see themselves going down the wrong path because of some of the issues I just mentioned. And it obviously goes way beyond this as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I remember when we talked about dating during COVID, you had mentioned a few things about how to handle situations like that. If you remember the question primarily, what were some of the things that you mentioned on that?
Of how to deal with each other during COVID?
Yeah, how to deal with each other during COVID, yes.
Well, in general, I would say, I don't think I talked about this specifically in the last episode. I think it's very important to reach consensus, and I'm very big on agreements. I would actually recommend a book people probably familiar with, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. It was a big seller, and those agreements essentially are based on agreements that one makes with themselves in terms of being honorable and honoring your word and etc. But the agreements need to be transferred over to the partner, and you need to reach a middle ground. So during COVID, whatever the issues may be, whether it be, as we talked about, political differences or how to handle the finances, how to handle if they have children, how do we handle dealing with the children because they're home, an excessive amount of time and maybe longer because things are still fluid in terms of schooling, if they have school-age children. The bottom line is to reach an agreement. And you see how much this crossover, whether it be, finances with Ramona or
Right.
account, this crossover in the sense that you have to treat this like an arrangement as well. It's a love arrangement, but sometimes you have to get really nuts and bolts and practical when there's a crisis going on. And what happens is people are just sort of flailing about
Right.
and not really taking a step back and saying we need to sit quietly and go over these issues and come up with a game plan.
Right.
Yeah.
And
One thing I noticed, the line is always, we're in this together, but we're not in this together because everyone's at a different place. If you've done your retirement accounts, if you have money put aside,
right,
if you have rental properties that are producing an income, it's not the same as if you've been furloughed and your wife's been furloughed and you got a mortgage payment coming up. There's, it's not, we're not all in the same boat.
no,
So
for
COVID
sure.
now has, probably helped you in our the what I'm looking at is your method of dealing with what the problems are hasn't changed, but probably the volume is going up.
The volume is going up. The intensity level is going up, and it's an unfortunate situation because people are really frightened. And again, this crosses over into so many areas. There isn't a consensus even for how one approaches dealing with COVID. Some people are a little bit feel safer getting out and about, traveling, meeting with people. Some people barely want to leave the home, which becomes an issue individually, becomes an issue as a couple. And if they're parents, it becomes an issue as parents. For the one that decides to stay at home, it's their decision based on some fears or projected fears. I don't want to get into like the realities of this stuff because nobody really knows for sure. So I don't judge either way, but resentments build. Like, I'm the one that's staying home all the time. You're out and about going to the pizzeria and meeting your friend, for example. And
Right.
I can't do that. And fights ensue. Then you'll hear, well, you can join us. Well, no, I
Right.
can't join us. I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to eat outside. I'm not going to order takeout.
Right.
You know that. So now I'm cooking all the time, by the way, too. And you can't cook. So who's it on? Who's it all on? You see how this starts like
Right.
spiraling? It's not just about those issues I mentioned. I could go on and on. There's probably hundreds of them that are sprouting up right now, and it's creating an incredible amount of stress and tension for people. It's creating an incredible amount of stress, I think, for everybody on this panel. I would imagine, for some
Right.
degree or another. Within definitely a scale of stress, but everybody's feeling it.
I don't think anybody is not being touched by what's going on.
Impossible. You're not human,
especially financially, because it does affect everything that affects everything else. Ramona, you have a comment?
Oh, I would just say, Joel, I was just enjoying listening to you and just thinking about how important it is to have the conversation. Because even when you just talk through the scenario of when you go outside, I'm not going to eat out. It's then, helping your partner or helping your loved one, if you're with family, just figuring out what is comfortable. Okay, maybe it's just going out for a walk in the neighborhood, right? So just having the conversation sometimes is the hardest part, at least starting it. But then once you get into it, do you find that at least when the communication lines are open, there's the possibility of finding, a solution. The one thing I wanted to say, just comment on what Oscar said, which is true, financially, even people who are still working, who are working remotely, who are adapting, there's still a lot of insecurity out there. There's so much uncertainty about the future, how long the pandemic will last. We're in an election season, which just there's so many other stresses outside the home. So even people who are working, I work with clients who, many feel secure in their jobs and others, don't. because you just don't know what's going to happen. We keep hearing about big company bankruptcies, every week, furlough numbers every week. People who are going back to work in the office physically are not comfortable, like Joel said, just getting on transportation and then coming back home. And now we're in the beginning of school season, which is a whole different level of stress, for families at all levels. If you're parents, I talk to a lot of couples where, one of the partners is a teacher, and just all the angst, that some of the teachers have. So Joel, I love hearing you talk about just sort of keeping the conversation going, opening the lines of communication. But, to Oscar's point, I think people are coping in the best way that they can, for themselves, individually, as couples, as families. But what I will say, as a financial advisor, just still being on top of it. I do have clients who've been furloughed who are in between jobs, and just having a plan, just figuring it out, is it a part-time job now, or pinching off the emergency fund, or pinching off the savings, just kind of having a strategy so you don't feel like you're flying by the seat of your pants, which creates more stress. So just having, even though the contingency plan may change, just at least feeling like you have something to go with, for the next few weeks or the next month or so until something changes.
Now, the final question is the one I love to ask, because that it's going on. Like you said, it's election time. A lot of different things are going on. A lot of different spin is going on in home. Sometimes in families, you have the Republican side, you have the Democratic side, you have the independent side. And it sometimes these conversations can be intense, right? What is it? What are some of the things you'd say to families that are dealing with those different ideals? We'll start with Joel.
Yeah, as I spoke about the last time, I think that if you're aligned politically, this is a much easier ask. And even then, you want to keep it to a minimum, because it's inevitably going to raise the blood pressure. Even if you're aligned, something's going to trigger you. Whether you hear a speaker, or you expect somebody to speak a certain way and they don't, somebody contradicts. There's always going to be something.
Right.
So I would try to keep it to a minimum. And you really just want to create an atmosphere of harmony around you. And I quite frankly am a little biased. I think, especially TV news is not really news. It's infotainment at best, and it's really just about frightening people, including what happened today with the storm, which is horrific. But they were building it up to be Armageddon, and it turned out to be. Listen, it's horrible. Don't get me wrong, but they love this build up, and they do the same thing politically. So I would really tell people to be very discerning about what they allow to enter their system, because they're dealing with so much outside the political realm. All the things we just mentioned, right? Mm-hmm. Finances, children, working remotely, working at home. So try to keep it to a minimum. If you're not aligned politically, you really have to keep it to a minimum. And really be very, very discerning about discussing it. At all might be a little bit too much of an ask, but really keep it to a minimum, and focus on, as we talked about the last time, focus on what you can control, let go of what you can't, and and then see how things unfold over time. But you have to be careful, because there's already triggers that are happening just between the two of you. Now we're talking about national and global triggers. You put that all together with the pandemic, and yes, they may be overshot today, but there was a hurricane, maybe, and who knows? There's going to be fallout from it probably here. Right. We're supposed to get a pretty big storm later this afternoon. This is like how much more, right? Can one deal with?
Right.
At the
and
same
then you have
time.
COVID.
And COVID, it's unprecedented in my lifetime.
Right.
This level of uncertainty and fear.
You're so right. You're so right. I think the priorities, in personally, my opinion is, I prioritize it as, what's going on out there. I don't have to bring it, into my relationship with my wife or my nephew or my son, you know. And my family is all over the place when it comes to politics. So we just made up our mind that it's, even if we talk about it, it's a subject line. You know, it's not like it defines who my sister is or my cousins are or my nephews are. Everybody has their choice. Everybody has some, and that's a great thing about, you know, democracy. Everybody has a choice.
Right.
You know, everybody can choose and refuse, and that's great. It doesn't make the other person an evil person.
That's a good thing and a bad thing, because we are social animals. You know, we tend to group with people we like and ideas we like. So when you have two people in the same house that are of different political mindsets, that's, you know, there's no way to hide that.
It's challenging. One thing I neglected to mention is, in terms of, you know, mitigating the stress, is really try to keep the social media stuff to a minimum right now, because if people are on social media, then they know how heated it is. So either you're talking into an echo chamber,
right,
and it's going to be a stream going, you know, 3 miles long, and the partner who's not aligned with you is reading this, and then they're now analyzing every comment you make, or you're going to get a tremendous amount of pushback, which is going to create a tension level, because people define themselves a lot. That's a whole nother topic in terms of how people define themselves through likes on social media, and are almost seeking that validation. That's why I think inherently so much of this stuff is so toxic outside of the COVID period. This sort of artificial means of communicating. So at the very least, if you're talking face to face, and this, I guess, even this is, you know, limited in its regard. It's not the same as actually breaking bread and sitting down together at an actual table. But be really careful with the social media stuff. Pull back from it. That's also toxic, in addition to the infotainment you get on cable news.
You don't have to post every thought that you have.
You actually don't have to post any thought that you have, not even every thought. You might just want to talk about it.
But I know people that post every single, they have a thought and they think it should be shared on Facebook.
Well, there's no filter. It's just, they're not thinking about what's the purpose behind this. It's just more of like, I need to sort of spew this out because they're feeling so overwhelmed, but they don't realize the ramifications of it, that it may trigger others. They're just sort of, it's not a pleasant term, but they're vomiting it up, essentially, without really, like, just hit the pause button, wait 2 seconds. So just wait. Should I do this? Should I not? And if you give yourself 2 or 3 seconds, the odds are you won't.
Yeah, is it true? Is it helpful what you're going to post?
What am I doing? People think they can affect the world with a Facebook post. It ain't happening. Newsflash. It's not happening.
No, I really appreciate a lot of what you've said so much. And I'm like, I could just see myself. I'm not really big on social, and I kind of dip in and out, and I haven't really been on. I haven't been on in months. I mean, I'm on like LinkedIn, so that's where people can find me. Ramona Thomas on LinkedIn. But I was going to give some other sort of suggestions on things that people could do during COVID to sort of find some peace. You know, find the things that you really enjoy doing. So instead of connecting with people on social, actually pick up the phone and have just an old time conversation with a friend or an aunt or cousin. You know, the cousin who makes you laugh that you haven't talked to in 2 years off of Facebook, right? Or old friend you've been meaning to call, someone that you worked with, like just the old fashioned phone conversation, or writing a letter. You know, I know we've talked at different groups talk about streaming services, right? So what movies are you watching, or a TV show, but just finding another way to just bring some peace into your life, reading a book, doing a puzzle, walking around the neighborhood, whatever your craft, if you scrapbook, or doing something with your kids, if you cook, trying a new recipe, you know, just there's so many different things that we can do that really do bring us joy. So making a very conscious effort to do that. I think, we're certainly creatures of habit as people, and we tend to do the things that are easy to do and that we know how to do routinely. So I just, for those who are struggling, with the pandemic and so many different ways that we've talked about, especially we've been talking about couples, find something to do together that make you both happy, a different movie, a different streaming TV show, or doing a puzzle or playing a game or cooking together. Just there's so many other things that we can do together with loved ones that can make one or both of us smile. So that's the thought that I want to leave people with.
That's wonderful, Ramon. Really is.
Oscar, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you can do as a family is what you were talking about earlier, is get that will done. That's sit around the table and let's do that. And that is one of the services that I provide in my business. Your will, living will, healthcare power of attorney now is more important than ever. And the biggest problem I've seen is, who do you call? How much is it going to cost? How long does it take? And through Legal Shield, we are able to do that at a very, very minimal cost. It's a $25 a month subscription fee, and it's the Netflix way of doing legal services rather than the blockbuster pay by the hour. So that's one of the things I love talking about. When Frank was talking about what's your passion, what keeps you excited and focused, this keeps me excited and focused because what I'm doing, my little part is bringing the legal service to everyone in the US, making it affordable. You only get the justice you can afford, unfortunately, in this country. So equal justice under law it's a good slogan, but up until now it hasn't been really realized. So that's one of the things that we do, is level the playing field legally for everyone and have people, be able to get that will done, get the healthcare power of attorney in place before the next wave happens. Because everybody's like, oh, it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to me. But we're seeing the numbers that we're seeing, and we don't know what it's going to look like in the fall. So that is my, that's my focus now. Identity theft, of course, is the other part of my business. But right now, the biggest focus that I'm looking at is leveling that playing field for everyone legally, and make sure everyone has that will, living will, and healthcare power of attorney in place. And one of the great things you can do, like you said, as a family, is like, okay, you know what, cousin Phil gets nothing because he's been a bad boy, So we call it the final love letter to your family, or it could be the final finger to the family members that haven't treated you right. Ramona mentioned some people that have died without a will. The two most recent, I think, was Aretha Franklin and Prince. So those are two people you'd figure they'd have enough legal sense to have everything in place. But again, it's something that you don't think about. And a lot of people don't want to do their will because they don't want to think about dying. And, I tell people, you can talk about sex without getting pregnant, and you can talk about your will without dying. There's a certain spot for it. And having that in place also will reduce a lot of the stress that we're seeing. Not all of it, but at least that little corner of it gets taken care of.
Wow. Thank you so much, Oscar. Really appreciate you sharing that. All of this is vital information that we all need to put in place. We all need to have. These are professionals that we're bringing to you each and every week with this information so that you can reach out to them. You can contact them. You can secure your family with legal aid and in getting legal documents together. You can call Ramona to get your financials together. We see how much all of these areas are tied together in keeping your family safe and your investments safe. Your mind insane. We have Joel who was online here, and he's talking about keeping how to keep yourself in a safe place internally and just in your relationships as well. So all these information is available to you on our website. If you go to phoenixnationalbusinessgroup.com, you can get the information as well for Ramona, Oscar, and everyone that you see on the line. But you have to register as well for the promotion that we have going on right now. So don't miss out. If you retain the services of anyone that is within our network, yes, we have a gift of $50 for you. Ramona, Oscar, Joel, anyone that you reached out to, you mentioned PNBG, and they'll know that it came through the network, and so that you can receive the gift that we have for you. So share this with your friends, share this with your loved ones. Don't let anybody miss out on this opportunity. Only 5 people will be available for this. So be one of the 5, all right, as well. So thank you guys again for watching. This is the end of our relationship summit. I want to thank everyone that took part. Jacqueline, Dr. Jacqueline, that was on, Frank Coppola, Karen, Mayo, Mikhail, Fisher, Oscar Capel, who was my partner in crime on this, and just everyone that had taken part in this. Thank you so much for us bringing this information to the public. And everyone, please keep your eye out, because Phoenix is rising. All right, Phoenix is rising. We are aiming for the top. So keep an eye out for us on your local television station, because we are working closely with a partner on that. And you will definitely see some of these programs being run as well. So again, thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Take care and stay safe.